Well,
Hello. Hello.
Hi, how are you? Welcome.
Very well, and good evening, Turkey. Thanks so much for inviting us. Delighted to be with you. If not in person, then at least via video camera.
Yeah, we listened to the investor side, their dynamics and everything else, and now we'll listen to the startup ecosystem from you. And what's interesting for me actually is the new organization building models like in La Casa de Papel and Squid Game, building groups, task groups to build successful results. Actually, there's wireless and other things, but business management is also very critical in this series. Well, this is my concern. I leave the word to you. So you'll be telling us about the startup ecosystem, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, we are hitting on the right considerations, particularly in scaling segments. Having the right ideas, the experiences is typically a shortcoming of many ecosystems in AI and in other sectors. And it comes particularly to creating a noticeable, a remarkable scaling segment as opposed to just creating smaller startups. But let me make a few remarks during the presentation. So what we have here in front of us, and I'll be sharing it in a moment, is a piece of thought leadership of research that we at Genome put out. We at Genome, jointly with our ecosystem friends all around the world, put out every year. It's called Global Startup Ecosystem Ranking, GSER 2021. We launched. The official launch has been 2 weeks ago, where we stepped on the stage with the Deputy Mayor Agrawal in London, and used London Tech Week as the platform. But I'm delighted to have the opportunity to present it here with slight nuances. This should give you an overview of what's happening in the world in tech overall, in terms of startup creation, in terms of investment trends, in terms of regional trends, what's happening not only in Turkey, but in other parts of the world that you might find of interest when you consider expanding your business abroad, which is the prerogative for scaling successfully. I also would like to take a few minutes, if you let me, to look at different industrial subsectors or tech subsectors, all the way from agtech, agricultural tech, to education, to life sciences, just to see what is happening here long term and what has possibly changed a little bit over these eventful times over the last 15 months. So that you can see a little bit where the dynamics are here. Data are global perspective as well. So it's not specific for Turkey. It's not specific to AI, forgive me. We wanted to bring you a really broad overview. We will most likely develop a AI-specific ranking report and deeper insights to the end of 2021, beginning of 2022. We are not there yet. For very obvious reasons, we have to focus our research capability at the moment on climate change. But I'll explain all of that during the presentation. Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. In an environment where the supply chains and the consumption models and everything is changing and demographics is changing very fast, we'll be delighted to listen to you. The stage is yours, and please share your screen. And I'll leave
Karim and fellow entrepreneurs. Give me about 20 minutes or so. If there are any questions, raise your hand. And afterwards, I believe you got some 8-10 minutes. I don't want to stand in between you and dinner and relationship building activities, but maybe let's aim for something like 20 minutes. Yeah, and then have your questions. Thank you. Great. Okay. Let me show a few slides, and maybe Karim, you could let me know if you can see it properly.
If you get to full screen, it will work.
Yes. How does that look? Does that look good?
It's excellent. The stage is
nice.
Yours.
Great. Thank you so much. So as having set key insights from the GSER, Global Startup Ecosystem Report, just fresh off the press. And let me click a little bit further. Yeah, here we are. So I will be telling you 2 minutes about what we do, not to promote ourselves, but rather the knowledge network that we are building. And I think that's an important element. Global insights, really high level from GSER, regional trends. We should be having a look a little bit at what's happening in Asia, what's happening in Europe, what's happening in MENA. And this having said, very brief facet perspective on subsectors, as we call them, or technology classes. I think that's relevant. Who are we? Actually, a fairly small organization. We are 35 people based in San Francisco, London, Berlin, and New Delhi, founded about 10 years ago by Silicon Valley serial entrepreneurs who wanted to give back to their communities. They've done well as entrepreneurs. Now they want to give back. We've developed what was an idea, a research project, understanding the ideas. How can ecosystems develop? What are the success factors? What are the gaps? What does private initiative? What does community? What does government need to understand in order to be successful? We're working today with 100 governments in 40 plus countries, governments at the municipal and the national level, and 40 plus countries, and public-private partnerships as well in our research and our policy advisory work in order to propel entrepreneurship as broad and as far as we possibly can. That's the mission: accelerate the growth of innovation ecosystems through good policies, proven policies that we know, that we've seen, that we can quantify in data, so that every society, regardless of where you sit geographically, can participate in the value creation that we see in startups, and so that it doesn't become limited to a few locations only, as it has been in the past. Member network, you can see it here. I'm delighted to point out Istanbul Development Agency as a member of this network, of this really far-reaching knowledge network. So great to have representation from Turkey here, and even more welcome in the future. Of course, we know how important Turkey as a startup, as a tech ecosystem is in Europe. About the report just launched, when you look at that, it's a ranking report, which tells you a lot about individual cities, regions in the world. Interesting for entrepreneurs to understand, where can I scale successfully? What does the community look like? What does the investment landscape look like? Interesting for talent looking for a geography, for a startup ecosystem, where to work, where to build their success. That's certainly hugely relevant. And the report is used a lot by venture capital partners, firms, in order to determine where interesting pockets of development that they so far have not had on their radar. So looking beyond the Silicon Valleys and the Londons and so forth. We work with 300 partners. Partners are workspaces, accelerators, incubators, everybody who is part of community. We've interviewed and surveyed about 50,000 founders. So thank you to all of you as entrepreneurs who've contributed to this unique piece of research over the last 5 years. 280 startup ecosystems are in the ranking. We look at the top 30 directly, and the top 100 emerging ecosystems, put them into a very public ranking to stimulate a little bit of debate. Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. You can find it on our website, and I'll show you the link later on. There's also, for our entrepreneurs, some really interesting insight pieces that are a bit more towards typical founder questions. Professor Thomas Hellman, dear friend of ours, talks about how to divide founder equity properly when you develop your term sheets. And Sandy Yu from Carleton University has done some interesting work around accelerators, to join or not to join, or when to join, and when probably not to join. What's the effectiveness of what you can do in that space? So worth reading, I believe. Without further ado, global insights from the research, the big question we asked ourselves, and I can tell you we were dead scared when we saw the effects of COVID first hitting China, and we looked at early stage investment in China too, because we were anticipating that it would spread around the world. What were the effects? And early stage finance, or venture finance overall, completely dried up in the eye of the storm as the pandemic hit China first. We thought, well, this is going to come everywhere. We saw particularly early stage up to Series A drying up very, very quickly. And with companies, startup companies in the Series A up to Series A with a financial runway of 3 months, 6 months, what do you typically have if you can't get the next round? We were really fearing the worst for an entire generation of startup founders to go bust, basically, in that pandemic. We wrote lots of articles, shouted at every government minister we could possibly find, called them and said, well, this is something that needs attention, needs attention of the public sector. And I believe, and many others in the community have done the same, and I believe jointly we have succeeded in unlocking public funding. And when we look at the last 12 months, the results are very, very different. We've seen unprecedented levels of venture capital going into startup ecosystems. So no reason to be scared from that perspective, but that's how our thinking evolved when we saw what was coming with COVID. Luckily, it has turned out better than we could possibly anticipate it from a funding perspective. Where are we as a startup economy? This is also something we as entrepreneurs, as community, should sometimes tell our governments. When we look at the value created, that's valuations and exits of the startup economy around the world, it's 3.8 trillion. That's how we can quantify it. When you think about that, it's bigger than most of the G7 economies. Yeah, this is bigger than the German economy, as an example. So it is a instrumental, a big economic factor. This is not a cottage industry and something nice to have. This is a must for any successful economy in the 21st century. And these data sometimes help convey the message. So that's why we spread them out. Where is this value being created? 63% of value created by startup ecosystems is still concentrated in the top 10 locations. This is not countries, this is cities in the world. Just think about that. The story was much worse when we started, 2011-12. 87% were concentrated in very, very few places in the world, in the top 10 places. And that's how it looks like. There's San Francisco up there, Silicon Valley, New York, London, and Beijing, Boston, and Tel Aviv. But, and that's the big but, the great story that we want to see, it has so much democratized. Every major city in the world, every clever and forward-looking government has put in place initiatives, concepts, etc., in order to stimulate community development, to stimulate the tech sector. Some have done that better than others. We can look at examples, but at least the willingness is there. So the perspective is there, and we foresee that again, many more cities will join the startup revolution. That is so important. And the pandemic really brought it home, right? Without startups, without e-commerce, without fintech, without telehealth, what would we have done? We simply couldn't exist without these tools, and we couldn't have a conference like the one that we have today. So all made possible by startup entrepreneurs in their ecosystems. Here's the ranking, where North America, unsurprisingly, still claims a lot of the top spots. Sorry. I'm really sorry. Somebody has copied the totally wrong chart in here, because these are the emerging ecosystems and not the top ecosystems in the world. This should be Silicon Valley first, no surprise. And then the second one should be London and New York tied. And that's an interesting one to look at. London, where I'm sitting, number 2 in the world for the second time. And one of the factors there, and that's interesting to note for all of us, is a very high degree of global connectedness. Let me put global connectedness that allows for companies to successfully scale in so many markets. The UK economy is not that large, but it is so connected, and the London ecosystem is so connected that it helps so many entrepreneurs to really develop into foreign markets and scale very, very successfully. So that's something to look out for when considering the scaling journey. How connected is our place where we are sitting, and what can we do to drive further connectedness? Apologies, really, there's a mistake in the slide. I'll correct this later on in the presentation. But if you take this away, not too much change in the top ecosystems, apart from a few, and some are worth noting depending on which sectors you're active. So Tokyo has really surprised us, entered the top 10 ecosystems in the world for the first time, moving up 6 places in a ranking. This is not only growth, all tech ecosystems are growing. It's jumping in the rankings. That's quite extraordinary. You see that very rarely. Up 6 places to number 9. Impressive exits, great ecosystem value created. Truly high tech, advanced manufacturing is an example. It is a place to be reckoned with and to be looked at also when considering Asian expansion. In China, Shenzhen broke into the top 20 at number 19. The dynamic in China is still incredibly fast. Very different in the Chinese market. That's maybe the only one which is not globally connected. It's just playing with this vast domestic industry and vast domestic population. So it is the opposite of a London. Beijing is exactly the opposite. Beijing has a massive local market, as Shenzhen has, but they are not necessarily as globally connected and as easily to be accessed if you think about scaling into China. Tricky, entirely possible, but needs preparation. Philadelphia moved up 15 spots. Really, really interesting to see what's happening here in North American ecosystems outside of Boston, Silicon Valley, and New York. Many of those are specializing in a number of industrial clusters. Another one not mentioned here is Pittsburgh. One of these older industrial regions written off for many, many years, now coming back based on technology that is inspiring advanced manufacturing in that particular example. Also, Toronto Waterloo, that's a great example when you look at how do I combine research, universities, and an ecosystem. We call it ambidextrous ecosystems, both hands. The academic side and the entrepreneur side are coming together. Toronto Waterloo, smaller city, smaller region, is one of the best examples to look at if you're interested as a policymaker, somebody who wants to strengthen the ties between university and the ecosystem community. That's a place to look at and to learn from. The results are incredible, 14 worldwide for a smaller region. That is something really noteworthy and looking at. And Seoul, great example if you're interested in deep tech. Seoul is a big city. It is the world market leader in the sense of patent creation and technology, deep tech. But it has struggled to make these connections and is now starting to succeed. Good policies, good initiatives, community initiatives that help so much better build this connection between academia, research, patent holders, and the startup community to try out these new ideas and see if they stick and if we can build a business model around it. Look at the results. So it was nowhere in the ranking 5 years ago. It's number 16 in the world, up from 20 last year. So this is the result. These rankings are results, but they are the results of community work and good policy. That's why we are pointing them out. Asia continues to rise. You see the global ranking here of Asian ecosystems, the Seoul, Tokyo, Shanghai, Beijing, and Bangalore, not as fast, but still a force to be reckoned with. Tokyo and Seoul clearly in the lead, and the lead is driven by deep tech. This is not e-commerce, this is not fintech, this is deep tech. Great example again for policy and for community work that I wanted to point out. It might inspire your own thinking a little bit, is Amsterdam, or the Dutch startup Delta, as it is called. This is a great example, not for putting a vast amount of money into an ecosystem, but for tech entrepreneurs taking ownership of their community, building what we call a keystone team, a group of entrepreneurs that looks at an ecosystem, sees the gaps, and acts like entrepreneurs would to backfill these gaps. If it is in funding, if it is in talent development, if it is in getting visa for foreign talent to come into the country. Really entrepreneurial, working with the city of Amsterdam and the city government, but working as entrepreneurs. When I look at these results here, again, growth, everybody grows, but jumping in the rankings, it's extraordinary. It's worth looking at. They are today at number 13 in the world, coming from 19 2 years ago, 17 4 years ago, apologies. And having been much smaller in the more distant past. Yeah. So key success factor learning here is really looking at what can community achieve. Also to give you a feeling for the impact of community, we measure local connectedness. That's the quality of community, and we can measure it. We can put it in data. This is nothing but founders helping other founders, angel investors helping other founders, picking up the phone, giving 2 hours of their time without any commercial interest. That's community. Corporations giving a technical expert, making a technical expert available for an hour or so for free. These elements to look at an ecosystem that is highly connected, has a great community on average in the world, allows an entrepreneur to grow their revenues by 2.1x. Everything is the same funding, same business model, same people, but the community counts. 2.1x, double the growth rate. And I think that's what we as community really can influence without any government budgets. So that's a good case to look at. What else? When we look at the leading ecosystems in the world, all of those are highly globally connected. That means founders know somebody else in another large ecosystem. They're connected to a New York, to Silicon Valley, to a London, to a Singapore. They can draw upon the knowledge, they can ask for mentorship. This is global connectedness. And a mindset in which founders very early on, even in seed stage, when we think about product, we design it for a global market. It's really the culture, the ambition to create something that's a category leader in the world, in a large geographic region at least. That's really driving these successful ecosystems. So culturally, and the high level of connectedness that allows to tap into the knowledge that's being created elsewhere. Bit different in deep tech. If you have AMR in robotics, there are other places in the world. You don't have to go to London necessarily or Silicon Valley. There are other places in the world. But again, the successful ecosystems in robotics, they are connected to these other pockets, Munich and Odense in Denmark, Seoul in Korea, etc., where knowledge is being created. That's important. That's where we see the world leading ecosystems in these different sectors succeed. Global connectedness. That's the visualization when we talk about global connectedness, a network diagram in which we put together mathematically relationships. At the center, still Silicon Valley. There's New York. There's London. So they are really at the heart of these knowledge networks. But others are moving into getting stronger connected, and that's something to look at. It's just a visualization of results here. You can see how strong the connections in any ecosystem in the world are, and we can analyze if they're strong enough. Positive note, I was talking about democratization of access to startup ecosystems. Many more cities in the world having a strong ecosystem today. These are the ecosystems that at least have one unicorn. We can debate if unicorns are so important, but they are a result, and they are a lighthouse that inspires the next generation. 91 ecosystems in the world today have at least one unicorn. And I think the world really is catching up. A few years ago, this absolutely was not the case. So it's not a Silicon Valley story anymore exclusively. We see funding, again, we need the fuel to grow, is up everywhere. That's what I said. We were so concerned about the impact of the pandemic and investors being fearful and kind of closing the taps. That has not happened. We have a bumper year of VC investment all across the world. Asia very strong, North America very strong, Europe getting its fair share. The MENA region has doubled over the last 2 years in investment. MENA as in Israel, UAE, Gulf states, etc. It's the definition we use. And even Africa, apologies, the slide doesn't really do it justice, has more than doubled in its investment that it has seen. The growth dynamic is remarkable. And we are delighted to see that because there's so much that technology can do in this part of the world. Again, regional trends, yeah, I pointed it out already. We've doubled the number of unicorns since 2019 in most regions in the world. Where are we today? Latin America 6, so that's a Sao Paulo, that's a Buenos Aires. In MENA, that's largely Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and of course Tel Aviv. Europe strong, Asia as a whole coming up, and North America still being the largest ones. Same picture when we look at where are exits actually happening in the world as a sign of scaling and successful company development. Asia is incredibly catching up. Yeah, so when we see here the blue line, Asia is super strong when it comes to successful exits and exit values that go hand in hand. Europe is doing okay. North America obviously is getting a little bit squeezed when you look at it from a percentage point. So Asia is really the big story here to look at. Looking at emerging ecosystem rankings, regional shares, delighted to say that Europe, I mean, as Turkey, you're really in the middle of Asia, the MENA region, and being part of Europe. Europe still has 37% share of emerging ecosystems. So these are the runners up outside of the Silicon Valleys and so forth. Largest concentration of ecosystems. So the European kind of different cities contributing to tech development is very obvious here. It's broad. That's what we see in this slide. And let me move a little bit away from regional trends. I think we've seen that, but comment a little bit more on subsector technology classes. It is the story of deep tech. It is undoubtedly the story of deep tech that we are seeing. Capital invested, deep tech versus tech shows a story. Tech in general is still larger, but deep tech is catching up enormously fast. All the growth and investment comes from the deep tech sectors this year. Capital investment as a percentage of tech, deep tech as a percentage of tech that you can see here, growing particularly in late stage funding. Look at the red line where we are coming out in 1920, and you're heading right in the pandemic. Investment in deep tech, 35% late stage Series C, incredibly strong. For deal accounts, the same, deep tech versus tech. Deep tech accounts for almost all the growth when it comes to the number of deals, not a value, but the number of deals. So again, it shows vibrancy. Deep tech has arrived with investors, that's for sure. And that's what we see regardless of where you are. And last but not least, slightly more complex slide. What we do, we measure 2 dimensions. We look at exit growth in different technology classes. Where do we see the most exits as a sign of maturity of a technology class like AI? That's the horizontal axis here, the x-axis, and on the y-axis we look at Series A, and that tells us a lot about the vibrancy. Are new companies coming out in the sector? Are they seeing Series A investment? Is there vibrancy in smaller next generation companies? That's what it really describes. If you're up on the right-hand side, and that's where you are, and this is an AI conference today, AI and big data rules across the world. This looked a little bit different 2 years ago, this chart, but you have firmly arrived. It's the largest exit values, and it's the largest amount of capital going into seed stage Series A. So huge vibrancy is still coming more and more and more. It's maybe not a surprise as AI is basically embedded into every industrial subsector, from life sciences to education to mobility to smart cities and so forth. It's everywhere. It's an integral part. From my perspective, I always describe it the same as cyber. Without AI, you don't have intelligent solutions. Without cyber, you can't really use these solutions because they might just get become a security threat. So I think you're in a fantastic place here, realizing large values. They will go back into the ecosystem. Exited investors typically pump capital and their experience and mentorship back into the ecosystem. And then we see how many new companies are coming through. The other one I find particularly remarkable, and I've been talking about this for 5-6 years, and somehow nobody listened. Agricultural tech, new food, ag tech, has finally arrived. Super vibrancy in terms of early stage capital going into it, but we are now also seeing the great exits that are so important. So the venture capital scene has really clocked up to what probably can become the largest sector in tech in the world when you think about farming, food supply chains, food provenance, food security, and so forth. The climate aspects of agricultural and food that are so important. That's what we are seeing. Fintech doing okay. The pandemic has helped a little bit, breathe a little bit more vibrancy into fintech, particularly in some parts of the world. Life sciences has benefited as for a long time. Telehealth, etc., had stalled a little bit. The pandemic, of course, has given us a second lease of life, as we call it. And the same, gaming and edtech were quite boring subsectors for a few years when you look at large global trends. Forgive me if you are in gaming or in edtech. That has changed, as we didn't have schools without education tech. I got a young daughter. She would not have had schools without entrepreneurs who made it possible for her to learn in this pandemic. And gaming, as we all thought, some distraction and some entertainment away from the news about this terrible pandemic. So these really have profited from what has happened over the last 15 months. It'll be interesting to see where how this further changes. But AIBD, as having said, you are absolutely in the right space. Every ecosystem we ask, they talk about artificial intelligence as a means to develop applied AI, as a means to bring more dynamic into different sectors, all the way from e-commerce to fintech to mobility to life sciences and so forth. So that's really great to see. And again, something to show around, to say we as an AI community, we are making such a big contribution to tech. If you are interested because you want to scale, because you want to attract talent into ecosystems, we rank 250 around the world. It's not everyone, but it's the vast majority, or 280 in our ranking. And we have landing pages for every single one. So you can at least within a minute get a snapshot of what is this place? What are median funding rounds? What's the cost of talent? What's interesting in these places? Here's the snapshot for Cape Town, just as an illustrative example. So you can very quickly see, is this a place where I want to expand to, where I want to hunt for talent, whatever might interest you. Get a very quick picture of what's happening there. Strong subsector strengths are always shown here in Cape Town. It's fintech and edtech, education tech. That leaves me with the last slide. All of that and a lot of policy discussion is codified in the annual report. It's the largest, the most comprehensive report around the world. And rankings are interesting as such. They trigger a lot of debate, and that's what we are trying to do between communities and politicians. Politicians asking, why am I not doing as well as my peer? Same city, same size, but I'm not doing as well. Why? And that allows us to come in, and us as community to come in and say, well, because you're doing a few things not as well as the others. Learn from them. Try to emulate, call them, learn from them, tap into the knowledge network that we are providing. That's the story of the GSER. You find it in this web page. Please use it. And as having said, we will have much more detail around AI, most likely in the spring of 2022. That leaves me with one last sentence. I'm almost asking for forgiveness, but we had to make a decision. Do we do a special on climate tech or a special on AI? First, we went for climate because we have the fundamental belief that we need to innovate ourselves as a world out of the climate crisis. We need to make a contribution as tech entrepreneurs. And what we are seeing at Genome in our research is lots of entrepreneurial activity in climate, all the way from agriculture to clean water to whatever have you. But we are not seeing scaling success. And small companies, as interesting as they are with 2-3 founders and 10 employees, are not changing the world when it comes to the climate crisis, we need scaling companies of remarkable size, and we need to see the late stage investment going into that. That's why we formed an alliance, a group, an NGO, that is called Entrepreneurs for Climate. And we invite everybody to join, AI companies, big data companies as well, because we need these expertise to really join a movement that allows us to actively attack and address the climate crisis, as opposed to waiting what will happen, or not using our not enjoying life, not being able to travel and so forth. We want to see technology to provide a meaningful answer, and scaling will be important for that. So that's why we went with the spotlight on climate first, but we'll revert back to AI very, very soon. Thank you for the opportunity to show these global trends. And if you've got any questions, please fire away.
Yeah, actually, I had a question, but it's a long discussion. As far as I can see, the business models are changing, especially the youngsters are migrating to countries or places or the cities, as you named them, or they are using virtual infrastructure, working from here to a company in some other place. So how will this change this ecosystem? Because there's no more big headquarters. New York is the center of finance, and another city is the center of something. But we will not have that anymore, I believe.
An entrepreneur in Sao Paulo said the best thing this was May last year. So everybody locked up during COVID lockdowns and so forth. And he said, for the first time in Brazil, I have to say, I'm in Sao Paulo and I have the same chance to get seed stage investment from an angel as if I'm in the Amazon Delta, where they never come as investors. I got the same chance because I'm delivering the same pitch. There's no difference because I'm in the room. That's democratization of access to funding. I found that quite remarkable. I think realistically, what we are hearing a lot more is that centers of gravity, places where we meet, where we have community, will certainly not go away. We're seeing a bit of a rebalancing, but it's not black and white. To say these centers, these cities will not play a role in the future, we don't really see that. But the models are getting more intelligent. And when you go back 2-3 years, the big ecosystems, the Valley, London, etc., they were all complaining about one thing: it's access to talent. And all of a sudden, the opportunities are much bigger because we've improved the way to work remotely. And I think for younger ecosystems, it's a great chance for this global connectedness. If I'm sitting in, take Ukraine as an example, and I'm working with somebody in London and somebody in New York, I'm building these relationships. And the next time when I found my own company, I got knowledge that I have acquired in working with these scale-up entrepreneurs in these very successful ecosystems. I've gathered that knowledge, so we see it very positive. But I guess, who wants to predict? But I think it's going to be a hybrid. We don't see the Istanbuls and the New Yorks and so forth go away, because human nature always will wish to congregate, will wish to have a center of gravity, and in the end also have a chat face to face at some point. Yeah. So I was glad for the first time in 15 months to return to London Tech Week last week. There's a lot of be careful, don't meet people too closely, but at least we are in a room and we feel as community again. So I think it's going to be a hybrid. It's not going to be a black and white.
Okay, thank you. Now I asked this question because the next speakers will be talking about building a center of excellence, and I say bye to you and thank you for all this information and your comments. And now yes. Hello.
Thank you very much. And please have a look at the report. Any questions, you got the contact details. We would love to engage in a conversation with you. Yeah, and we'll be coming back on AI.
Okay, we'll do that.
Conference. Bye bye from London.
Bye.